What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through 5 league-winning wide receivers that you guys should be looking to target in fantasy football this season. If you guys missed it, I talked about some league-winning running backs today also, so check out that video if you haven't seen it already. If you enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. But let's dive right into my first league-winning wide receiver, and it is going to be Nico Collins. He is currently being drafted as the wide receiver 13 in the early third round. He is coming off a monster year 3 breakout where he was the wide receiver 7, averaging 17.4 PPR points per game. I think the major concern that most people have with Nico Collins is just the target competition, right? You have Stephon Diggs coming in, you have Tank Dell heading into year 2, and I know last season Stephon Diggs wasn't there, but Nico Collins actually averaged more PPR points per game when he was playing with Tank Dell compared to the games where Tank Dell missed. Nico Collins is clearly locked in as a top 2 wide receiver in snaps. He is going to be one of those wide receivers in on 12 personnel. And I also don't think he's at any risk of losing routes in favor of Tank Dell. I think if Tank Dell is breaking into 12 personnel, it would be Stephon Diggs who would be losing those opportunities. I think there are just going to be enough opportunities within this Texans offense to go around where I'm not overly concerned about Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell eating into Nico Collins' usage. CJ Stroud has the second highest odds to lead the NFL in passing yards. He has the third highest odds to lead the NFL in passing touchdowns. And I also showed this chart in my must draft every round video, but we do have multiple examples within the last 20 years of wide receiver rooms with like 3 really impressive guys having solid seasons, even though there is a lot of target competition. So you can see within the last 20 years, you have the 2021 Tampa Bay Buccaneers, you have the 2018 Rams, the 2013 Broncos, the 2012 Packers, and then the 2004 Colts. Most recently with the Buccaneers, you had Chris Godwin, Antonio Brown, Mike Evans, all averaging over 16 PPR points per game. For the Rams, you had Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, Brandon Cooks. All 3 of those guys were averaging 15 plus. Broncos, Demaryius Thomas nearly hit 20 points per game, and that was with Decker and Welker averaging over 16 points per game. Packers, not as extreme in terms of the ceiling. You had Cobb, Jones, and Jordy Nelson all at 14 or more, but I think you also had Greg Jennings in there averaging like 12 points per game. So really you had like 4 really good wide receivers. And then with the Colts, Marvin Harrison Jr. almost hitting 18 points per game, Reggie Wayne almost hitting 17, and then Brandon Stokely at 14 plus. So I definitely think the Texans could be a team that I end up kind of adding to this graphic at the end of the season. I feel like they're set up. CJ Stroud should be going more pass heavy. You obviously have the stud weapons, but I just wanted to point out that it doesn't mean your ceiling is completely capped just because you have those weapons. I want to be targeting good players from good offenses. Nico Collins, definitely fits the mold there. Now, shifting over to my second league-winning wide receiver, it is going to be Malik Nabers. He's being drafted as the wide receiver 24, like a late round 4 pick, early round 5. And I guess this kind of goes against what I just said with drafting good players and good offenses, because this is just a straight up bet on an elite talent with Malik Nabers. He checks pretty much every box you'd be looking for in a top tier wide receiver prospect, had solid production as a freshman, broke out in year 2 with over 1,000 receiving yards, then just completely dominated this past season, his junior year. 13 games, had over 1,500 receiving yards, 14 touchdowns. He's a great athlete, 6 feet tall, 200 pounds, ran a 4.4 40, and then gets drafted 6th overall. So he has the production, he has the athleticism, he also has the draft capital. The main concern here, obviously, is just his situation with the Giants. With a good landing spot, I would have him right up there with Marvin Harrison Jr. He would be a locked-in top 12 wide receiver if he had a good landing spot. I mean, if he went to the Chargers, I might have him like right after that A.J. Brown, Puka, Garrett Wilson tier. Like that's how high I'd be on Malik Nabers if he did get that great landing spot. But I do think it's being a little bit overblown, like just how awful this Giants offense is going to be and how it's going to be completely hopeless. Even though Malik Nabers is super talented, if the quarterback plays terrible, he's not going to be able to do anything. I've seen a lot of comparisons to guys like Garrett Wilson, Drake London, Terry McLaurin, all players who haven't really been fully unlocked due to poor quarterback play. Guys like Garrett Wilson, Drake London, I feel like are hitting close to home, and it's why people are a little bit concerned because over the past couple of seasons, even though they've proven to be talented, they obviously haven't been great fantasy options. But I think there's a pretty significant difference between those guys' situations and Malik Nabers. And the main difference I see is I think quarterback play, like Daniel Jones may not be great. I don't think he's like Zach Wilson level bad. I don't think he's Desmond Ridder level bad. Like maybe you disagree with that. But I think the main point I want to talk about here is that Brian Dable is a massive upgrade over Arthur Smith. He's a massive upgrade over Nathaniel Hackett. And then when we're looking at Terry McLaurin, right, he's just had an insane number of quarterbacks, hasn't been able to be unlocked. I just think Malik Nabers is a different level of player than Terry. Terry's great, but I think Malik Nabers could be truly one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. And I think if we want to look at like a potential example, like a comp for the type of season Malik Nabers could have, I think we just have to look at Jalen Waddle's rookie season. Super talented player, good draft capital, not going to a great situations. Dolphins, I believe, are like a bottom third offense. Waddle's rookie season, he still finished as the wide receiver 15 in points per game. He didn't necessarily have the big play upside or, the efficiency that maybe we expect or he's seen in recent seasons. But his rookie year, they peppered him with targets. He produced with volume. And I feel like that's something similar that Malik Nabers could do here. He's my wide receiver 17. I'd be willing to take him in the third round. I think if you're getting him in the fourth or the fifth, he really is an absolute steal. Now with my third wide receiver, we're actually going to go back to this Texans wide receiver room because I want to talk about Tank Dell. He's being drafted as the wide receiver 26. That is a round 5 pick. And I honestly can't remember the last time we've seen a rookie play so well and then get drafted like outside the top 24, pretty much drafted as like a fantasy wide receiver 3. Typically, if you're a rookie, you have a great season, you show out, you're going to be skyrocketing up the rankings because people are expecting a jump in year 2. Just to put into perspective how good Tank Dell actually was last year for fantasy, in the games where both Nico Collins and Tank Dell played at least 50% of the snaps, Tank Dell actually outproduced Nico Collins. He averaged 18.8 PPR points per game compared to Nico Collins' 18.2. If Stephon Diggs was not on this team, I'd probably have Tank Dell as a fringe wide receiver 1. He might even be in my top 12. That's how highly I view Tank Dell as a player. Obviously, the Stephon Diggs thing is a hit to him. He has been locked out of 2 wide receiver sets throughout the preseason. He's only been in there on 11 personnel, which in the short term, it's definitely going to cap his upside. But I think that's kind of baked into his price here. Like, I feel like wide receiver 26, we are acting like he is the locked in wide receiver 3, but I just don't think there's any guarantee that that holds throughout the entire season. I think maybe he could completely overtake Stephon Diggs. Diggs really, was struggling in the second half of last season. Maybe he's starting to slow down, and he doesn't even have to completely take over those opportunities. Maybe him and Diggs start splitting, those 2 wide receiver sets, which would obviously help Tank Dell. And then I just want to reference the graphic I showed earlier, where even if he is the wide receiver 3, he can still pay off at this price. You have Mike Evans, wide receiver 3, 16.4 points per game. Brandon Cooks, 15.2. Wes Welker, 16.1. Jordy Nelson, 14. Stokely, 14.6. Like I talked about with Nico Collins, I believe Tank Dell is a talented player in an offense that has a very, very high ceiling. I think he can pay off even if he doesn't overtake Stephon Diggs, but I think he also has that upside of taking over Stephon Diggs, outproducing him, and delivering a monster year 2. Now, shifting over to my 4th league winner, I want to talk about Xavier Worthy. He's being drafted as the wide receiver 38, a round 7/8 pick. And I just think this is way too late for someone who has legit upside to be Patrick Mahomes' wide receiver 1. He's a first-round rookie pick. He's already getting the starting wide receiver routes in the preseason, which, may not seem all that crazy. You'd assume first-round wide receiver, not a great wide receiver room, at least especially now with the Hollywood Brown injury. So you maybe think well, duh, he should be slotting in as a starting wide receiver. But keep in mind, Rashee Rice, who's now being drafted as their wide receiver 1, didn't really get that type of usage last year until the last 5-6 games of the season. Even in a very poor wide receiver room, the Chiefs were slow rolling Rashee Rice. They are not doing that same thing here with Xavier Worthy, which I think is a great sign for him. I do believe that Xavier Worthy is the archetype of player that the Chiefs would want to be their top weapon. I feel like with Rashee Rice, he was used as kind of a dink and dunk option last year. Very low ADOT, under 5 yards. I believe it was at 4.8. So I feel like they were kind of just working with what they had with Rashee Rice last year. But Worthy is a big play threat. He can win down the field, the fastest 40 ever at the combine. So that speed paired with Patrick Mahomes, his big playability. Xavier Worthy is my wide receiver 28. I'd be willing to take him in the 5th round. like if I was forced to. If I had one draft, that is how highly I view Xavier Worthy. So I think he's going to get devalued because he's a rookie. People are kind of hesitant to take the swing on the rookie because they could completely bust. They don't feel like a super safe pick. But for me, the upside is completely there for Xavier Worthy. I like him here as like a honestly high-end wide receiver 3 in my opinion. And then my fifth and final league winner, it's going to be another rookie. It is Brian Thomas Jr. He's being drafted as the wide receiver 48, a round 9-10 pick. And this is just another rookie here. I'm very high on a lot of these guys, specifically these three. He is a freak athlete coming off a monster junior season. He's 6'3", 210 pounds, ran a 4.33 40, which is insane regardless of size. But to run that at 6'3", 210, that is an insane 40 time. 13 games last year, had 1,177 receiving yards, 17 touchdowns. He has already pretty much locked down the Calvin Ridley role from last year. And even though Ridley was somewhat underwhelming for fantasy, he still had the 9th most expected fantasy points at the wide receiver position. So just because he didn't come through, it does not mean that the opportunities were not there. The opportunities were in play for Calvin Ridley. It just really didn't come to fruition. And I also just think that Brian Thomas Jr. is a much better fit in that Calvin Ridley role than what we saw last year. And I think his skill set aligns very well with Trevor Lawrence. We know that Lawrence can push the ball down the field, and he wants to push the ball down the field. He was 3rd in 20-plus yard pass attempts last year. He was also top 10 in deep pass completion percentage. So not only was he pushing it down the field, but he was pushing it down the field with efficiency, with success. Calvin Ridley was 8th in deep targets last year, so a decent number of those were going to Ridley. Last season in college, Brian Thomas Jr. caught 14 of his 18 deep passes. He led all college wide receivers in yards from deep passes. We also know that Brian Thomas Jr. is a red zone threat, led all college wide receivers with 17 receiving touchdowns. Calvin Ridley was 3rd in red zone targets. So I just think Brian Thomas Jr., a talented prospect, paired with Trevor Lawrence, I think their skill sets align very, very well. And I think getting him as like a back-end wide receiver 4, high-end wide receiver 5, I think he has some legit upside this season, already playing with the starters. I think he could be a league winner for you. So that is going to wrap it up for my 5 league-winning wide receivers. We had Nico Collins, Malik Nabers, Tank Dell, Xavier Worthy, and then Brian Thomas Jr. Let me know your thoughts on these players. If you have any fantasy questions, feel free to drop them down below. If you want to see my rankings, you can look at the description. My full rankings for free. You guys can download them. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.